Good morning, Rotary District 7770, and welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People for Friday, October 23rd. My name is Donald Hovis, your CWRAP host from the Chicora Rotary Club in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We're pleased to be joined this morning by Major General Craig Whelden of the United States Army. Good morning, General.
Morning. How are you, Don?
Very well, sir. Thank you for being with us. We're excited about your presentation. So for those of you on the line today, I'm just going to lay a little housekeeping here. This will be a very lengthy and informative and interesting presentation. General has got some amazing things he wants to share with us. We do want to get to your questions. However, as I said earlier, it's going to be a very lengthy presentation. So if you can hang on with us, we'll go as long as we can, but just know he's going to cover a lot in his presentation. So there's no question of the day today. There's no introductions today. We're going to jump right into his bio and get to his presentation to give him more time to talk to you guys. So here is General Whelden's bio. You know, his leadership journey began as an Eagle Scout at age 14. 30 years later, he was the youngest general in the United States Army. In 2019, he retired from the military and published Leadership: The Art of Inspiring People to Be Their Best, winning 3 National Book Awards and attaining #1 international bestseller on Amazon. I will post a link to the book in the chat if you're interested. If that's a question you have, I will post that in the chat. Craig is now a global Fortune 500 speaker and lives in Bluffton, South Carolina. You can learn more about Craig and contact him through his website, which I'm going to post in the chat as well. So let's give a warm District 7770 welcome to General Craig Whelden, sir. Thank you for your service, first of all.
Thank you.
At this point, you can talk, share your screen, whatever you wish to do at this point.
Okay, so thanks everybody. I was in the Army for 30 years. I was a senior executive with the Marine Corps for 9 years. In between, I had a 7-year period where I was consultant. During those 9 years, there was a 3-year period after 9/11 that I ran a national conference on Homeland Security and information sharing. So part of what I'm going to tell you today is from that experience, because we tried to piece together after 9/11 what went wrong and how to fix it. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. I also spent the 2 years after 9/11 running, essentially leading the effort to secure the state of Hawaii against terrorist attack until I retired in 2003. And so part of what I've done here in this presentation is draw from that experience as well. This is a very visual presentation, so I'm going to put some PowerPoint slides up. It's not a lot of reading, but it's a lot of looking. There's maps, photographs, and different things, and I will talk about those as we go on. So let me first put the presentation up on the screen. And you should see the header slide. Somebody give me a thumbs up. You got it? Okay. So one of the questions I always start off is asking a rhetorical question. Where were you on 9/11? And I suspect every one of you probably remembers exactly what you were doing, where you were when you heard of the attack in New York. Perhaps not when the first plane hit, but certainly when the second plane hit, because just about everybody who was awake turned their television on to watch what was going on. I was the deputy commander of U.S. Army Pacific. Yes, that's me about 19 or 20 years ago. I've grayed a little bit and got a little more wrinkled, but I was serving as the deputy commander, U.S. Army Pacific in Hawaii on 9/11. But on that day, I was attending a conference in Washington, D.C. And so what you're looking at here is where the conference was located at the DoubleTree Hotel and the point of impact of the attack. You can see the Pentagon on the left-hand side. That's a total of 2,700 feet from where I was sitting to where the airplane landed. Now, we were in a conference room, and it was run by the Army. It was below ground in one of their basement conference rooms. So when the attack on the World Trade Center occurred, somebody ran in the room and told us that an airplane had hit one of the World Trade Centers. And we didn't pay much attention to that at the time. We thought it's an unfortunate accident. We had no idea what the weather was like in New York City. But certainly when the somebody came in the second time, just 15 or 20 minutes later and said a second airplane has hit the other World Trade Center, we immediately knew this was no accident. So we established a direct line to the Army Operations Center, which was in the Pentagon, and we brought a television down into the conference room so we could kind of track what was going on in New York City. At the time, we had no idea that we were about to be attacked, and it wasn't much longer that in fact we were. You can see Highway 395 between the Pentagon and the hotel that I was staying in. So before I go into that what happened that day, let me talk a little bit about the Pentagon, because most of you probably have never been there. I know at least one of you has actually served there. Eerily, construction began on 11 September 1941. That's really, really strange because it was, 70 years to the day that it was attacked later, or 60 years, I guess it was. 4,000 workers. Now the construction began because they anticipated the need to consolidate all the War Department offices that were scattered all over Washington, D.C. in 30 or 40 different locations. They saw a need to consolidate them because I think they saw the winds of war were moving our way, both in Asia and in Europe. And so the construction began. It was a very simple building, but it also happened to be the largest business building in the world. After Pearl Harbor occurred, they increased the workforce from 4,000 to 15,000. And in 16 months, the largest building in the world was completed. President Roosevelt initially viewed it as a place to consolidate all the War Department efforts during the war, but after the war, it would become a repository for archives for the federal government. Of course, we know that didn't happen. It continues to serve to this day as sort of the center of gravity for the entire Department of Defense. Simply designed, 5 floors, 5 sides, 5 concentric rings, largest low-rise building in the world, 6 million square feet, 17.5 miles of hallways and corridors. It is designed, if you look at the sketch there, to get from one corner to the farthest point in the building in 7 minutes or less. It's very efficiently laid out because it holds 25,000 people on any given day, with anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 visitors coming to visit the Pentagon, not working there. So you can have anywhere from 25 to 30,000 people there on any given day. On 9/11, the number of people in the Pentagon was down around 22,000. There were about 3,000 people who were not there because it was in the middle of a renovation to, ironically, bomb-proof the building and harden it against, because we had already experienced Khobar Towers, the Oklahoma bombing, city bombing, and some other attacks that we thought we're going to have to harden some of the federal buildings, particularly like the Pentagon. And it was well over $1 billion construction project, because what they were doing was turning a brick and mortar building into a steel reinforced concrete building with Mylar windows and all the latest technology to bomb-proof the building. It is affectionately known by those of us who have worked there as the Puzzle Palace, because it is a bit of a puzzle, both physically and metaphorically speaking. It also holds the National Military Command Center, which is essentially the duty officer for the country, a position which I held for 2 years from 1996 to 98. I essentially had a key around my neck on a string, and together with my deputy, who was a lieutenant colonel, I was a brigadier general at the time, we could have started World War III by turning messages that would go out to the nuclear force to launch missiles. We had about 23 to 25 minutes to respond when we detected a missile might be inbound from the Soviet Union before it would land. And so we practiced blowing up the world on a daily basis to make sure that it became like a golf swing, just muscle movement, that it would become second nature. And I never had to do that. obviously, and nobody's ever had to do that, but we've had a few false alarms throughout the years, and that's another story I could tell on another day. So this North Tower was hit at 8:46 a.m. And as I said, somebody told us about it, but we didn't think about it. Look at the sky and how blue it is. There was no weather concern in New York on that day. It was only 17 minutes later that the South Tower was hit, and that's when everybody knew that the nation was under attack. But again, nobody knew that there was an airplane headed to Washington, D.C. Now this picture reflects a superimposed commercial aircraft coming into the Pentagon at the angle. The Pentagon is designed so that it has 5 concentric rings. This outer ring that you're looking at, it's got the biggest hole in it, is the E ring. The next one is the D ring, then the C ring, then the B ring, then the A ring. The one in the middle is called the A ring. So as this airplane went in, it just happened to hit one of the sides of the building that had been completed with the reconstruction to bomb-proof the building. So obviously you can't completely protect it against a commercial airline that's flying at 400 to 500 miles per hour, that's full of fuel, hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel. But my point is, this airplane did not go through the entire building. It went through the E ring. You can see the damage it did to the D ring right there at the top. You're looking at the roof of the D ring, it's still intact. And there's damage to the C ring, which you can't see, which is further on. But when it hit the building, it spewed fuel left and right and forward and started a fire that actually burned for about 48 hours. This is the flight path of the airplane. And as you can see, it didn't come straight into Washington, D.C. It came over the top of the White House. If you follow that white arrow, you will see towards the top on the right-hand side, a red house there. That's the White House. That shows you where the White House is. And it flew right past the Washington Monument, and then it did a big circle coming around, losing altitude the entire way. Now, why did it make that circle? It's my contention that the original target for this airplane was not the Pentagon, it was the White House. But as you'll see on this next slide, the White House is a very, very small building. And if you're not used to Washington, D.C., and you've not flown a big airliner like this, moving at 400 to 500 miles per hour, you can see how easily you could miss the White House because it's so small. It's surrounded by trees, and the other buildings that you see there are actually larger than the White House. So as it came in the direction that you see with the white arrow, it was not able to maneuver such a big airplane in time to hit the White House. So it started to make this long, circuitous route to try to circle around and come back to the White House. But by the time it brought itself down around, it had lost altitude. It saw the Pentagon directly in front of it, and he decided, I'm going to take this target instead of the White House because I have no choice. I can't hit the White House from here. And I believe that's the reason it hit the White House, the Pentagon, and not the White House. So I want to point out a couple of things about the Pentagon. You can see the arrow, the orange arrow at the bottom, that reflects the point of impact and the angle that it came into the Pentagon. If you look to the left of that, you'll see a white elliptical sphere, and it says in there, not yet renovated. So the portion that it hit had been renovated. The portion that's circled in white had not yet been renovated. Now, why is that important? Because as you look at this photograph, you see the hole in the wall. This picture was taken on 9/11 in the afternoon, and you can see the fire coming out of the windows on the far left-hand side, an area that had not yet been renovated. So when the airplane hit the building, and I stood right kind of where to the right of where that fire truck is, looking at the building, I can tell you that the windows that are on either side of this hole are intact. And they are intact because they had already undergone renovation, been hardened, mylar sheetings put on top of it. But because of the concussion of the impact and the spewing of the fuel forward, left, and right, it blew out the windows further down on the left-hand side, and fire was coming out. And so that was an eerie thing to see, the someone may say or think that the reason there's no fire near the hole is because of the fire truck putting the fire out. And I'm here to tell you that that's not entirely the case, because I stood there and looked at windows that had not broken on the left and the right side of the point of impact. Now, this is a picture that was taken on September 12th, the next day. The green circle that you see there was sort of the center of activity. That's where the fire chief from the Arlington City or Arlington County Fire Department set up his command post. Imagine, if you will, on September 11th, particularly in the morning, everything that's to the lower right, where you see all those tents and vehicles, and none of that was there. It was just open field or grass area. This is where they used to have the helipad, and senior officials that left the Pentagon by helicopter would come out of the Pentagon, get in a helicopter, and take off. And so there was grass on either side of that entire way. I spent a good deal of my time close to where that green circle is for 2 days, because after the building was hit and I ran outside and we saw this black plume of smoke, I tried to call my wife back in Hawaii to tell her I was okay, because as far as she knew, I was in the Pentagon attending a meeting. I wasn't in the Pentagon, I was in the DoubleTree Hotel, and the meeting was being held there because visitors, attendees from all over the world were staying there. And the offices that were hosting the meeting was the installation management offices for the Army, headed by a 2-star general. He had about 45 people in the meeting with us at the DoubleTree Hotel. Regrettably and sadly, his offices were right at the point of impact. And the 2 secretaries that he left back to man the phones while they were holding this meeting over at the DoubleTree Hotel, both of them were killed. So I found myself standing on near the fire chief on the morning of September 11th. And at one point, somebody got on a bullhorn and said, "Get away from the building, another airplane is coming in." And in fact, that was the airplane that was eventually taken down by passengers in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So we all, if you see the road on the left-hand side of this slide, we all ran to the left-hand side of that road to get on the other side away from the Pentagon, because we didn't know where this airplane was targeted, and we thought maybe it's coming in to make a second strike on the Pentagon. When we got the all clear, we were allowed to come back closer to the building and resume whatever it is we were doing. We only learned later that the airplane that initiated that alert was the one that was taken down in Pennsylvania. So I found myself asking the fire chief, "Is there anything you need which the Army can provide?" And he said, "I need blocking and bracing material in order to hold up the sides of the building." So I called the 3rd Infantry Regiment, which is the ceremonial unit at Fort Myer, Virginia, which is less than a mile away from the Pentagon. And they have an engineer company. They have a wartime mission. They are the ceremonial unit. If you go to Arlington Cemetery, they're the ones that guard the tomb of the unknown soldier. They do a lot of other ceremonies in Washington for visitors and dignitaries and so forth. What most people don't realize is they also have a wartime mission, and they are very, very well trained. So they have an engineer company, and I said to them, "Can you get your engineer company to bring as much blocking and bracing like material down to the Pentagon to help the fire chief?" And they said, "Yes, we'll get on that right away." So I found myself standing, if you look at the green circle, you see where the white tent is to its lower right. That tent wasn't there on the morning of September 11th. I was standing about right there next to an FBI agent when in rolls 3 or 4 2.5-ton trucks, Army 2.5-ton trucks, full of blocking and bracing material, 4x4s, 6x6s, plyboard, all kinds of stuff, nails, hammers, all that. And this FBI agent turns to me and he says, "What's that?" Because I was an Army guy, I was in uniform. I said, "That's the 3rd Infantry Regiment. They're bringing in blocking and bracing material for the fire chief. Why do you ask?" And he said, "Because they're driving over my crime scene." And it struck me that we had 2 completely different perspectives at that point. We had a fire chief who was trying to save lives, who was trying to recover bodies, who was trying to put out a fire that burned for 48 hours. We had an FBI agent who, if he had his way, would be roping off the scene because it's a crime scene. Now, they were both well intended for what their purposes were, but they had two completely different purposes altogether. Later that afternoon, I started to get a little frustrated that it didn't appear that we had any central point of coordination, because we had, as you can imagine, Washington, D.C., the Pentagon, we had agencies come from Maryland, from Virginia, from Washington, D.C., from local governments, from state governments, from the federal government. We had people all over each other, and it wasn't clear to me who's in charge. So on the afternoon of the 11th, I said to another FBI agent who I just happened to be standing next to, do you know if there's any central point of coordination for this recovery effort? And he said, well, the Arlington County Sheriff's Department has established a command post in one of those great big Winnebago type vans up at the Navy Annex. I'm going up there. Would you like a ride? It was about a mile away. And I said, sure. So we jumped in his SUV, and it was just like in a movie, big black SUV, tinted windows. You couldn't see inside, antennas come out of the top, all kinds of sophisticated radios inside. So when I got inside the passenger seat, I turned to him. I said, what is it that you do? He said, I'm the chief of counterterrorism for the FBI. And I said, oh, well, that explains all this fancy communications equipment. He also established his credibility with me by telling me who he was and what position he had. So as we're driving up there, he says to me, hey, this is very close hold, so don't pass it on. But you know, that airplane that was headed to DC, it was actually not going to DC, it was going to Camp David, and it was shot down by US jets. And I said, really? Well, that would have been the first time in history that the United States has shot down a US airline full of civilian passengers. And so as the days ensued, and quite frankly, over the next week or so, I had this factoid in the back of my head from this counterterrorism chief from the FBI that was at odds with what we were hearing in the news. And I started to wonder, is this some kind of a governmental cover-up to hide from the American public the fact that we shot down a US airliner? And I eventually became convinced that was not the case. It was just the first report was wrong. And that is so common when you're in difficult circumstances of any kind, certainly the military, but any kinds. Oftentimes, you should put a healthy dose of skepticism in reports that come to you because they could very well be wrong. And in fact, this one, in fact, was wrong. So this photo shows you the reconstruction. It was taken a while later, obviously, because they had cleared out the E ring, the D ring, the C ring, and you can see the B ring and A ring are both intact. That airplane damaged all three of the outer rings, but not the two inner rings. And so the construction crews that worked on this building, and you can imagine how large this effort was, were determined to make sure they completed the task before the first anniversary of 9/11. And in fact, they did so. This building was fully operational with this damaged part completely renovated in August of 2002. Now, this is the memorial. Many people have seen on television, if not in person, the memorial in New York City. But most people, I don't think, have seen the memorial that was put up at the Pentagon. So we are looking at the point of impact of the airplane and the angle of attack of the airplane. And each of those benches represents a victim on the airplane or a victim in the Pentagon. As it turned out, there were only about 125 casualties in the Pentagon because so many people had been moved out of the Pentagon to temporary office spaces in Arlington, Crystal City, and other places while the renovation was ongoing. And so the death toll was much, much smaller than it otherwise would have been. Also, the senior leadership of the Pentagon was on the other side, on the river entrance. And so this was not one side. The most senior person killed in the attack was a 3-star general for the Army. He was actually the personnel officer for the Army. Each of these benches represents one of the victims, either on the airplane or in the Pentagon. If the bench is facing the Pentagon, it represents the victims that were on the airplane. If the bench is facing away from the Pentagon, it represents the people that were in the Pentagon. And their name is inscribed on each bench. There's a moving water underneath with a light. It's a very, very solemn place. So a family member or a friend of a victim on the 9/11 attack on the Pentagon can go visit this memorial and sit on the bench of their friend, their family member, and contemplate and remember them and hear the running water underneath the bench. They also have a wall that runs from 3 inches tall to 73 inches tall. And that represents the age span of the victims. The youngest victim was 3 months old, was on the airplane. And the oldest victim was 73-year-old, was a contractor that was in the Pentagon that was killed. Now let's take a quick look at the attack itself and the analysis. So I'm going to walk through the 19 terrorists. These two, Nawak al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Midhar, were 2 of the 19 terrorists, and both of them were known terrorists and thought to be in the United States. So they were added to the Immigration Naturalization Service watch list on or before 23 August 2001. I have them color-coded here for a reason, which you'll see in a moment. They bought their airplane tickets. Both of them were on the plane that hit the Pentagon. They bought their airplane. One paid for them with cash, and the other one booked his flight on August 25th and August 27th, respectively. These 2 with the circles, red circles, those are those 2 guys. And again, all the other 17 here, we didn't know anything about. We didn't know who they were, where they were from, or they were not on anybody's watch list. But these 2 were on the watch list. Why is that important? Because you'll see in a moment, we had the ability, or we should have had, in retrospect, the ability to connect the dots and connect these people to each other. So when those 2 individuals purchased their airline tickets, Khalid al-Midhar used what we will call common address number 1. Nawak al-Hamzi used what we will call common address 2, in green and blue, respectively. And these 3 individuals, including Muhammad Atta, who was the ringleader, when they purchased their ticket, they also used those same addresses. So now we have 5 of the 19 terrorists that used 2 addresses. 2 of those terrorists are on an INS, Immigration Naturalization Service watch list. And so there you see the other 3 identified. Muhammad Atta, who's the ringleader, who you just saw, also used telephone number 1 when he purchased his ticket. And these 5 individuals also used the same telephone number when they purchased their ticket. So now you can see that we have, I think it's 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 of the 19 that are connected to each other in the purchase of their airline tickets by either a common address or a common telephone number. Now, why is this important? It's because prior to 9/11, we had what I will metaphorically call stovepipes. Stovepipes meaning that people weren't talking to each other. The federal government, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, state and local government, science and technology, and the private sector, none of them were communicating with each other effectively. And so while we had spent hundreds of billions of dollars trying to protect this country from external attack, mostly from ICBMs coming from Russia or China, and you recall my story of the keys around my neck, that was my main purpose, was to respond to that kind of attack. We had 19 Saudi Arabian terrorists with box cutters and airline tickets attack the country from within. And it wasn't until 1 March of 2003, 15 months later, that the Department of Homeland Security was actually established. So in those intervening 14 or 15 months, the nation struggled to try to bring together and close the gaps in these different agencies so that we all saw a common picture. So Senator Phil Graham once said, "We all lust for the day when the lion and the lamb lie together, but when that day comes, I want to be the lion." And I think there's some truth to that. I don't see a day when the lion and the lamb are ever able to lie down together, like, let's say, for example, the United States and North Korea. But I'd rather be the lion than the lamb. So that's my website at the bottom. You can learn more about me, my speaking engagements, my book, testimonials, podcasts, articles that I've written and everything at craigwhelden.com. And I know you all are on a tight time frame, but that's essentially my presentation. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
Well, first of all, excellent presentation. Thank you so much, sir. Wow, just such an important part of our history, and I've never heard it described like that before, so thank you. I do see 2 questions in the chat, which I'll get to you in a moment. If you have a question, now would be the time to post that in the chat box for general. So this will be kind of lengthy, but just follow along with me here. I received an email about a daycare center in the Pentagon and how about 40 Marines gathered toddlers and children. Once outside, they formed a circle.
I got it. That's
Okay.
not true. So when I was a 1-star general, I used to run the Army's Community and Family Support Center. All the child care centers in the Army belonged to me. I didn't join the Army thinking I would be running child care centers as a general officer, but I ended up doing that. And so the lady who ran the child care center, who I've stayed in touch with for over 20 years now, she knows everything about child care in the military. And this question came up once before, and I didn't know the answer, quite frankly, about the 40 Marines helping to get everybody out, putting the cordon around and all that. It's not a true story, regrettably. I mean, it's a great story, but sadly, it's not true.
And then you'll see the next one's not really a question, but there are so many conspiracy theories, General, and yet I was there on Washington Boulevard, stuck in traffic when the plane flew over my car and hit the Pentagon. Wow.
Yeah. So my nephew was a Lance Corporal in the Marine Corps working at the Navy Annex, and the airplane flew practically right over the top of the Navy Annex at about 50 feet. He tells me that he heard this incredible roar followed seconds later by this explosion. The incredible roar was obviously this large airplane flying right over the top of his building. So you're right, there are conspiracy theories that says that didn't really happen, or we made it up, or it was a bomb, it wasn't an airplane. Believe me, it was an airplane. And as one of your members here can attest to, she actually saw it.
Wow. Yeah, she said it was the loudest thing she had ever heard, thought it was going to flip her car. So
yeah. I found, I've told this story a number of times, and I've actually had people both on Zoom and in person come up to me very emotionally touched by listening to me describe this because of the personal impact they felt on 9/11. Some people, I mean, I've had people in the audience who actually lost relatives in the World Trade Center. I knew people in the Pentagon who were killed, friends of mine. And so it touched many, many people, even if you didn't know anybody. And sometimes I found that it's helpful for people to tell their story. So I don't know if your folks have the time to do that, but if anybody online here today would like to just unmute and tell their 9/11 story, I'm happy to hear it.
let's have you answer one question before we do that. So if you do want to do that after this question would be a good time for me. When you realized that the Pentagon had been hit, what was your first thought?
Well, my first thought was before the Pentagon was hit, and that's when the Second World Trade Center. And my first thought was we're at war with somebody. I didn't know who, but I knew we were at war with somebody. And then, so it really wasn't a total surprise when somebody said there's been an explosion at the Pentagon, because we already knew that we were at war with somebody. It's sort of like, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Everybody knew. Quick story, the attack on Pearl Harbor. My dad was a sophomore in college in a fraternity at Purdue University. On that Sunday afternoon, he was walking up the stairs trying to decide whether to go see a movie or to study. And then he overheard from a radio in a room that he was walking by a report of the attack on Pearl Harbor. As a result of what he heard, he didn't go study, he didn't go see a movie, obviously, but the next day he went down and tried to sign up with millions of other great patriotic Americans. And they told him, go back to school. We can't take you all at the same time. We'll give you a call when we're ready. And it was several months actually before he got that call. But when he got that call, he went to basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas. They then sent him to a base that's no longer there in Texas. He learned how to fly an airplane, and he spent the war flying C-47s from India to Kunming, China, over the Burma Hump in support of Chennault's Flying Tigers. At the end of the war, he turned his plane over to Chiang Kai-shek in Shanghai, got on a boat and came home and went back to college. So it's amazing how events in history can change your life. And I know everybody in the audience here has had that kind of occurrence, even if it was a personal occurrence, not a national occurrence.
Do you know what height the plane hit? With Arlington National Hill overlooks the Pentagon, is high enough to almost clear the top of the Pentagon. It could have totally missed because of the 5-story Pentagon.
Yeah, I suppose it could have. It didn't, obviously. But again, my nephew, it came over the top of Navy Annex, and Navy Annex is on a hill next to Arlington Cemetery. So it was coming in, obviously, at a steep enough angle to be able to hit the Pentagon. Now, remember, these people that were flying the airplane took flying lessons in Florida, and all they learned was rudimentary actions about how to turn an airplane, fly an airplane, navigational issues. They didn't learn very much about how to take off or land because they didn't care. And in retrospect, some of the instructor pilots reflected about how little they paid attention to those kinds of things. They were able to, after the event occurred, put the pieces of a puzzle together, which they didn't see at the time of the lessons that were being given. And also a Piper Cub flies at what, 140, 150 miles per hour compared to a jet airliner, which is much, much faster, much, much bigger, much, much more difficult to turn and to maneuver.
And we have intelligence chatter missed this. Do we know why or how?
So there are, you all have seen movies, I'm sure, about New York City, where the FBI and the local authorities are fighting one another in years past about who should be in charge of whatever. So we have these competitions between local, state, and federal government agencies, and even within federal agencies, between agencies like the FBI, the NSA, the CIA, and so forth, and they don't always get along prior to 9/11. What 9/11 did for us was wake us up and make us all realize that we better get along, or we're going to have these kinds of things happen in the future. And that's why I spent the first 3 years after I retired from the Army running this national conference on information sharing and homeland security, whose main purpose was to focus on closing these gaps at the state, local, and federal level, and also laterally across each one of these. States exchanging information, federal government agencies. But again, those two terrorists that were on a watch list were only on one watch list, the Immigration Naturalization Service. So if they would have shown up at an airport or a port and had to show a passport, they might have been detected. But the FBI didn't know about them. The CIA didn't know about them. State and local officials didn't know about them either. So I can tell you, after what I experienced before 9/11 and after 9/11 and been involved with the federal government until just a year ago, I'm very comfortable that we are doing everything we possibly can to close those gaps so that this kind of attack doesn't happen again. But they've tried dozens of times in the last 19 years, and we have thwarted many of them. Some are public and some are not because of the classification level of the intelligence. But you only have to miss them one time. I mean, all of you saw on the news just 2 weeks ago, and this was domestic, that there was a plot to kidnap and potentially kill the governor of first Michigan and then Virginia by domestic terrorists. And we were able to infiltrate that and stop it before it occurred. That happens a lot. And the reason is because we've worked very, very hard to close those gaps.
It looks like we have one more question. I did post once again the link to your website to where if someone wanted to buy your book, they could buy that. What kind of threat do you think we will face today from operatives planted inside our intelligence community?
Well, I'm not so sure about, we have had a history, as most countries have had, of having moles, they call them. A mole is somebody that's inside an organization who's a spy for another organization. So, theoretically, we could have people inside our intelligence community who are not friendly to the United States. I don't know that now, but history has certainly shown that is possible. I think what is more probable is that we do have domestic terrorist type organizations in the United States who are on the far left and on the far right, both. The FBI director said just a couple of weeks ago that what he called right-wing domestic terrorist organizations or white supremacy organizations are the biggest domestic threat that we have. So yeah, this isn't going to go away internationally, and it's not going to go away domestically either. That's why we always want to be the lion and not the lamb.
Well, thanks so much for a wonderful presentation this morning. We do appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
And thanks again for your service. We do appreciate that as well.
Thanks. And Terry Moore, thanks for your service too. And any other veterans that may be on the call. And by the way, not just veterans, but first responders, firemen, police, they don't get the recognition that the United States military often does in airports or anywhere else. But I think the COVID thing has certainly brought out that we have an awful lot of selfless serving heroes in our country, not just the military.
I agree with you, sir.
All right.
In closing, I will do the, I will do the speakers for next week, as we always do on Friday. So coming up on Monday, we'll hear from Terry and Don Brashears on why they support the Rotary Foundation. That ought to be great. Coming up on Wednesday, October 28th, we'll hear from Bud Welch with the Carolina Balloon Fest. And then 1 week from today, folks, it's Halloween Trivia. That will be our speaker next Friday. So brush up on your Halloween trivia over the weekend. Get ready to win some prizes. And please come in costume. We understand, we already know there's going to be one person in costume already. And I'll let you take a guess on who that is. And it's not me. So look forward to that a week from today. And then I'll say this one thing. If you know a speaker that you would love to see here or a topic you would love to see presented here on CWRAP, please reach out to myself, Terry Moore, or Mary Gask, your CWRAP team, and we will get them scheduled. We're already almost booked up for November as well. So we'll be booking into December at this point. But we would love to hear from you and any Rotarians in your club. So without further ado, I'll close this down with the Rotary 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a wonderful weekend, Rotary. We'll see you on Monday for the next conversations with Rotary Action people. Have a wonderful weekend, guys. Bye-bye now.